Before sunrise on June 6, 1944, the western sky over Normandy flickered with distant flashes, silent at first, like heat lightning drifting across the channel. But the German lookouts along the coast knew better. What they were seeing were the first bursts of naval gunfire from the greatest invasion fleet in human history. In a concrete bunker overlooking the beaches, a young German officer scrambled toward a radio set, shouting for his signal operator. Behind him, the walls shook as Allied shells tore into pillboxes up and down the shoreline. Moments later, a message pierced through the static, frantic, breathless, barely coherent. Massive naval forces sighted. Hundreds, no, thousands of ships. The invasion! It's here! Those words raced through German command posts like a shockwave. For months, the High Command had promised that the Atlantic Wall would hold. Hitler himself declared it unbreachable. But even in these first minutes, as the explosions grew louder, something became painfully clear. The wall was already cracking. And inside the German High Command, disbelief was about to turn into panic. To understand the panic that followed, we must first understand the myth. The Atlantic Wall was more than a chain of fortifications. It was a symbol of Hitler's absolute confidence. Stretching thousands of kilometers along the western coastline, it was built to convince both Germans and Allies that Europe could not be taken. Hitler boasted that any invasion would be crushed on the beaches. His speeches were filled with imagery of concrete, steel, and unshakable willpower. German propaganda showed endless bunkers, gun emplacements, coastal batteries, and minefields. The message was simple: if the Allies dare to land, they will die before reaching the sand. But behind this proud facade were serious problems. Many sections of the wall were incomplete. Some defenses were outdated. Ammunition shortages plagued key strongpoints. The most modern fortifications were far apart, leaving gaps. Commanders constantly argued about whether mobile tank divisions or fixed coastal defenses should take priority. Rommel, recently appointed to reinforce the wall, famously said, "The war will be won or lost on the beaches." He meant it as a warning. The wall was dangerously weak. But those warnings were buried under Hitler's unwavering certainty. And on the morning of June 6th, that certainty was about to collide with reality. Inside the German High Command, Normandy was never expected to be the true landing site. They were convinced, absolutely convinced, that the Allies would strike at Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France. Every major intelligence assessment, every deceptive Allied message, every false troop movement had reinforced this belief. Operation Fortitude, the Allied deception campaign, had done its job perfectly. Fake radio chatter, inflatable tanks, bogus divisions. General Patton placed at Dover, supposedly preparing to command the real invasion. Hitler swallowed it whole. German generals, analysts, and even frontline observers were ordered to treat Normandy sightings as secondary or diversionary. So when the first frantic reports came in, enemy ships off Normandy, heavy bombardment along the coast, the initial reaction was not alarm. It was denial. General Jodl insisted, "This is not the main attack. The real blow is still to come at Calais." This assumption caused Germany to hesitate when hesitation was fatal. Panzers remained frozen. Reinforcements waited for orders that never came. High Command watched the invasion unfold through a lens of false confidence. And by the time they realized the truth, the beaches were already slipping away. Just after 5 a.m., German coastal units sent desperate messages up the chain of command. At 7th Army headquarters in Le Mans, General Friedrich Dahlmann listened to the scattered reports with growing unease. A young officer approached him with the latest radio transcript. Enemy landing craft approaching Omaha. Utah, Gold, Juno, Sword, bombardment intensifying. We cannot observe the end of the fleet. It stretches beyond visual range. Dahlmann muttered under his breath. This cannot be real. By 6 a.m., the scale of the invasion became undeniable. The biggest naval force in history was descending on Normandy, not Calais. Phone lines lit up. Staff officers shouted over each other. Maps were pulled out, markers moved, units reassessed. But for all the noise inside their command rooms, action did not follow. The German High Command was stunned, paralyzed by the size of the fleet and trapped by their own earlier assumptions. All the while, the Atlantic Wall, their supposed shield, was being ripped apart. Perhaps the most bitter irony of D-Day was this: the man responsible for defending Normandy wasn't even there. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, convinced that bad weather would delay any invasion, had returned to Germany to visit his wife on her birthday. He was also scheduled to meet Hitler about increasing defensive resources. As the first Allied troops stormed the beaches, Rommel was nearly 500 miles away. At 7 a.m., his chief of staff tried to reach him, but Rommel was still en route between towns. The message finally reached him mid-morning. "The invasion has begun." Rommel immediately ordered his driver to turn back, but the damage was already done. Inside High Command, generals were split between Rommel's doctrine, stopping the invasion at the beaches, and Rundstedt's doctrine, holding armored divisions back for a massive counterattack. No one knew which plan to follow. No one dared act without Hitler. Hours were wasted. Decisions were postponed. Units waited for orders that never came. Rommel had warned repeatedly, "If we don't defeat them in the first 24 hours, we lose the war." And now, in the most decisive moment of the entire conflict, he wasn't there to lead. By mid-morning, the truth was brutally clear. The Atlantic Wall was collapsing faster than anyone imagined. The naval bombardment had been devastating. Bunkers that were meant to withstand anything short of an earthquake were blasted open like tin cans. Machine gun nests fell silent as their crews were buried under tons of sand and concrete. At Omaha Beach, German officers reported, all positions heavily damaged, many guns destroyed. Cannot hold. At Utah Beach, American troops moved inland faster than any German defender expected. At Juneau, Canadian forces overran coastal defenses within hours. At Sword and Gold, British units captured key strongpoints with shocking speed. Messages poured in. "Our artillery is gone. Enemy armor landing. The wall is breached. We cannot stop them." In one bunker near Point du Hoc, a surviving officer radioed a final message before retreating: "The wall is not holding." Repeat, "The wall is not holding." Inside the German High Command, disbelief turned into panic. For months, they had been reassured that the Atlantic Wall would crush the Allies before they got ashore, that the beaches were a death trap. But here was the ugly truth. Most of the wall had been unfinished, undermanned, or poorly supplied. Many guns were old. Many bunkers were vulnerable. And the enemy was far stronger than expected. The wall that Hitler swore would protect Europe had fallen in a single morning. Now came the real emotional collapse, the reactions within the German High Command itself. At OKW headquarters, the nerve center of the German war machine, officers argued violently over the reports. Some insisted the invasion was a feint. Others demanded the release of armored divisions immediately. General Rundstedt, veteran of 2 world wars, stared at the situation map in silence before uttering his famous, despairing words. "Make peace, you fools! The war is lost." His staff froze. No one dared repeat what he had just said. Meanwhile, General Jodl, one of Hitler's closest advisors, refused to accept the truth. "This is not the main assault. Hold your positions. The decisive blow will come at Calais." Even as Allied tanks rolled off landing craft in Normandy, Jodl clung to fantasy. Others erupted in frustration. General Speidel slammed his fist onto the table. "We are fighting ghosts! We cannot defend everywhere at once." But the most shocking reaction came from Hitler's personal staff. At 10 a.m., one officer suggested waking the Führer. Another replied, "No." He ordered not to be disturbed. Hitler slept through the first 7 hours of the largest invasion in history. By the time he awoke, the situation had deteriorated beyond repair. Reports flooded in as he sat at the end of a long oak table, trembling with rage. Beaches breached. Armor landing. Atlantic Wall compromised. Our forces in full retreat. Hitler shouted at his generals, accusing them of exaggeration, cowardice, and defeatism. He demanded that every position be held to the last man. But the shouting did nothing. The wall was gone. The Allies were pouring in, and the German High Command was collapsing from the inside. It was almost noon when Hitler finally held his emergency meeting. His generals gathered around him, tense and exhausted, some still covered in sweat from having rushed in. The atmosphere was heavy, not just with fear, but with something worse: unspoken blame. Hitler's first words were not about strategy. They were about betrayal. "I warned you all. I warned you." He dismissed the early reports as exaggerated. He insisted the Allies were trying to trick him. He pointed to the maps, tapping Calais again and again. "This is the real invasion. Normandy is only a diversion. They want us to rush troops there. We must not fall for it. His generals exchanged glances, silent but filled with dread. Hours slipped away as Hitler argued, lectured, ranted. Every minute mattered, but Hitler wasted them. Only by late afternoon, when the sheer scale of Allied landings became impossible to deny, did he authorize the movement of the Panzer reserves. But by then it was too late. The Allies had already established beachheads. Paratroopers had seized key positions inland. Tanks were rolling off landing craft uninterrupted. Hitler had slept through the beginning of D-Day, and through the rest of it, he had argued his way into disaster. When the panzer divisions finally received orders to move toward Normandy, they faced a battlefield unlike anything Germany had encountered before. Allied fighter bombers prowled the skies relentlessly. Columns of German armor were bombed, strafed, scattered. Convoys were trapped behind destroyed bridges and craters. The counterattack that Hitler imagined, a sweeping armored blow to push the Allies back into the sea, was simply impossible. Messages continued arriving at high command. Panzers delayed by air attacks. Roads blocked. Enemy air superiority. Overwhelming. Cannot reach the front. The Atlantic Wall had failed, and now the reinforcements meant to save it were being shredded before they even reached the coast. In desperation, some commanders ordered small, fragmented counterattacks, but these were easily repelled. It was now clear, the decisive counterstroke Hitler had envisioned would never happen. The Allies had secured Normandy, and Germany had lost its greatest chance to stop them. By nightfall on June 6, the mood inside the German high command had shifted from panic to something far worse. Realization. The Atlantic Wall was broken. Normandy was lost. The Allies had established a permanent foothold in France. One general whispered to another, "This is the beginning of the end." In private conversations, several commanders admitted the truth. Germany could not win a two-front war. Not against the Soviets in the east, not against the Allies in the west. Not with their air force crippled and their divisions depleted. Even the most loyal officers began to admit what had been unthinkable just hours earlier. Hitler's war was finished. The failure of the Atlantic Wall did not merely open a beachhead. It shattered the illusion of invincibility that Hitler had cultivated for years. And once that illusion died, many inside the German high command lost their will to fight. In the days that followed, the consequences of D-Day reverberated through every level of the German war machine. Reports detailed the devastation. Entire battalions destroyed. Artillery positions silenced. Coastal defenses obliterated. Command structure fragmented. The Atlantic Wall, Hitler's pride, had been reduced to rubble in less than 24 hours. Inside high command, officers stopped speaking openly about victory. Instead, they whispered about survival and, in some cases, escape. Hitler, furious and humiliated, blamed everyone but himself. He dismissed generals, threatened court-martials, and ordered impossible counterattacks. But none of it mattered anymore. D-Day had opened the door to Western Europe. And through that door, the Allies would soon pour hundreds of thousands of men, tanks, and guns, all moving eastward toward Berlin. The fall of the Atlantic Wall marked not just a military defeat, but the collapse of Hitler's grand dream. History remembers many turning points, Stalingrad, Alamein, Kursk, moments when the tide of war shifted. But June 6, 1944 stands apart. It was the day the German High Command realized the truth they had tried so desperately to avoid. They could not stop the war that was coming for them. The Atlantic Wall, once a symbol of Nazi power, was exposed as a myth, a structure built on overconfidence, propaganda, and wishful thinking. And in its ruins, the German generals confronted the consequences of their own failures, their miscalculations, their arrogance, their blind obedience to Hitler's fantasies. D-Day was more than an invasion. It was a moment of revelation when the German High Command saw their defeat unfolding in real time. And as Allied troops advanced inland, carving a path that would eventually lead to Paris, the Rhine, and Berlin, one truth echoed through the corridors of German command. The wall has fallen. The war is lost.